And over the years, many of you have become friends and collaborators. So this is a wonderful reason to come together. I want to introduce our hosts for today, Kalani Nicole, the founder of Transfer Gallery. Round of applause. And Regina Harsani, the associate curator of media arts at the Museum of the Moving Image. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jezia, for welcoming us today. I believe we should be live streaming now. Hello, world. To start, we want to open up a space to make a statement about what's happening in our world right now. And this is a personal statement from all of us. We condemn the atrocities against Palestinians.
And we condemn the brutal attacks by Hamas on October 7th.
We denounce the current U.S. backing of the Israeli military, and we call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
We cannot go about business as usual without holding space for our collective grief. And we want to recognize the lives lost in these inhumane tragedies with a moment of silence right now. Please all call your representatives, protect each other, hug your loved ones. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for making space in this moment to come together and discuss care and cultural legacy. Thank you so much to Onyx for welcoming in this space. I also want to welcome right now Sarah Rothberg, who is an artist and researcher and is facilitating our local, our online audience as our local representative here in the space. Welcome to FORA. This consortium is being seeded by artist-focused organizations to do the specialized cultural stewardship work out in the open in order to demonstrate care methods which are currently centralized within institutions and private collections, namely conservation, appraisal, and archival care. So I think our idea is that transparency, iteration, and solidarity are fundamental studio practice for a generation of artists. And these same ideologies and practices can actually help us create efficiencies to deepen conservation and best practices for ensuring the longevity of media art. Thank you to Gray Area for boldly sponsoring this consortium. Your support has made this vision a reality. Thank you to Arts Equity Group for helping us shape this story into something that resonates in this moment. Thank you to NYU Tandon School of Engineering Integrated Design and Media Program for opening your sandbox and supporting us with engineering and research. Thank you to LaTurbo Avedon for trusting me with your work, and to all the artists and professionals who have inspired this work. Also, a huge thank you to our panel of experts for joining today. We have them here in the computer with us. We also have a few of them in the room with us. So thank you, Christiane Paul, Philip Rosedale, Muriel Quancard, Daniel Rourke, Wade Wallerstein, Michael Connor, and all of the brilliant minds at NYU's IDM program. We'll hear from Scott Fitzgerald and Yesha Shah, the grad student who helped with this work. We also want to welcome the virtual audience at this time. So Sarah, who do we have in the virtual audience?
The virtual audience is already having a lot of fun. We
Cool.
have Rebecca Edwards,
Yay,
Christopher
hi,
Coleman, Maria, Paula Fernandez. We have Jesse McKee, Martina Menegon, like lots of other people. Artificial Intelligence 24/7 Live.
Wow,
Yeah,
amazing.
it's popping in there.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of placemaking before we get started. As you can tell, there's a lot going on here, and this is sort of a reaction to LaTurbo's work. So on the slide here, we see that we're here in New York City at Onassis ONX Studio. This is a studio based in Midtown. Anyone who joined the stream a few minutes late, it's an XR studio, and they have been supporting us with this crazy experimental production and use of their beautiful gallery spaces as well to re-exhibit this work. We have the YouTube live stream. We're going to hear from the artist's studio, which is Unreal Engine and distributed. We're also in Second Life. You can actually go check out this whole exhibition in Second Life if you'd like to. And then we have our virtual panel. So everything is super co-located. Sarah is dropping links in the chat as we go. Yes, Second Life is still a thing. It's amazing. Lots and lots of people spend time in there, and we'll hear from the founder later today in this conversation. So this is an overview of how we're going to spend the next hour or so together. This is something that Regina and I have been working on for many iterations together now, many, many moons.
Which we'll talk about.
So we're going to just share a quick statement of purpose, because instead of sharing big ideas here, we want to share work, tangible work. We want to lead by example and doing that. So we're going to share a case study which goes into detail with the work we've done with new Sculpt by LaTurbo Avedon. We're then inviting the panel up for a peer review process, so including different perspectives, interdisciplinary perspectives. And then we have some methodology notes from Regina, getting more into the toolkits, and then some resources and a call to action. So at the top of the hours, we will switch gears to Regina, and then any artists who are in the room, we can obviously stay after. There's going to be a great lunch here, and continue to workshop through these ideas. So this is our statement of purpose, and it will definitely iterate with each convening. So this is version 1.0. You're seeing it here first. Open for comments, definitely open. We especially want to push into new territories with the interdisciplinary approach we have in bringing folks who are knowledgeable about an individual artist's work each convening, and show the breadth and depth of how cultural legacy is shaped. And so there are a few key issues that we're trying to address. Here they are. Number one, decentralized storage. This is something we have been talking about and experimenting with for a very long time. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. And so one of the key reasons that media art has been treated as an outsider out for so long is because of its precarity. And we know this mantra, lots of copies keep stuff safe. And we really believe that decentralized storage is one of the big untapped opportunities in this space, the DWeb or Web3 space. Number two, right now, the specialized knowledge of conservation is centralized. How can we open that up? That's something that all of these organizations that are coming together for this consortium have been experimenting with. And I am also excited to talk about appraisal and value. So that's the next point. How can we start to build value in new ways? This is something I'm investing in with Transfer at the moment through a project called the Transfer Data Trust. We will share a little bit about that. It's been a big collaboration between Regina and myself as well. And the last point that we're hoping to address is about value exchange. So what are all the non-monetary gestures and exchanges, the generosity we share with each other, our knowledge? This forum represents that as well. How can we build a new system around those values? And with that, we're about to jump in the case study and hear from the artist. But first, Regina will give us a peek at what to expect on the other side of that case study.
Yeah, thank you, Kalani. At the top of the hour, we're going to start talking about some of the methodologies we're already putting into practice, but also the shoulders that we're standing on, the giants around the history of time-based media conservation, and two projects that we're already working on with these methodologies. We're going to talk about what an archival information package is, trying to teach more artists about this, but it's also great for art workers to understand what it means to package an artwork and steward that. We're going to talk about workflows and ways that we're thinking about how we deal with metadata around these topics, which I think metadata is a great thing. It's not nerdy at all. We're going to talk about what's next, which is our focus on our next convening with FORA, hopefully with Museum of the Moving Image.
Thank you. And by the way, this will all be recorded, yes, so you can reference back to it afterwards. So before we get into the case study, we want to check in again with Sarah. Maybe we switch over to the desktop there and see what's happening in the chat.
There is an unprecedented number of inputs and outputs happening at this event, just so everyone knows. But it looks like LaTurbo's in the chat, which is awesome, over in the YouTube chat. And I don't know that anyone else has dropped in. Sarah Moosvi is excited to be here. Heracles is in here. People are just chilling, hanging out. And I guess at some point we'll walk over. You just give me the cue when you want me to walk into the exhibit that I guess now we're streaming.
Yeah, I think we will go into both the virtual gallery and the physical gallery here in just a moment. But before that, we are going to queue up the artist to kick off our case study with a statement. And here it is.
Hey. Hi. It has been a while. So nice to see you here. I would like to start by saying thank you to FORA, to Onassis ONX Studio, and to all the guests joining us here today. It means so much to me to look back on New Sculpt alongside such incredible company. For those of you who do not know me, I'm LaTurbo Avedon. I am an avatar, artist, and curator from the internet. I have worked solely from virtual space for nearly 15 years now. I want to be brief, since there is a lot for the group to discuss today, but I can say I have hope that my work might one day become a conduit for those of you who can chat today to exchange ideas. This connection, those who value and respect virtual worlds, and those who value the importance of art. I care about both of these things so much. You can say I've always been in game. Offline role-playing games, multiplayer games. I've had a whole life in virtual worlds, many lives in virtual worlds. I created myself here. I understood that virtual space is inherently fluid. Who I am, what I do, the variables are constantly changing. It would require me to generate everything, to simulate everything. My face, my voice, my text, the constant performance of self. I learned how to embrace these qualities, to let myself and what I create in virtual space continue to version, to modify, to update. Just like the games I played, I could continue to alter them. This has been a quality in my work over the years. Returning, rendering, dreaming, waiting. Going back to 2013. Wow, it was over a decade now. I had been invited by Kelani Nicole and her new gallery, Transfer, to do my first physical solo exhibition here in New York City. At the time I was in the process of coming out. I was still mostly in Second Life. I was hosting parties in virtual techno clubs, creating sculptures and installations there. Most importantly, I was trying to share this more widely, bringing my virtual experience into these quickly growing social spaces: Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr. As a queer individual, this felt important. There was a uniqueness to the way that my virtual body and presence could instantaneously reappear with my choices and changes. Immaterial boy, immaterial girl, I could be anything I want. Not everyone was supportive of this idea though. A month before my show was set to open in the gallery, another digital artist felt compelled to dox my personal information. It sort of turned things upside down. Right before I was about to have the most important experience in my career to date. I didn't really understand why the artist wanted to troll me, to share things I did not want to. I had gone to such lengths to share in this specific way. I wanted that to be enough. Part of me considered quitting making art after this experience. I didn't have these issues in the virtual environments where I came from. Social games had been toxic, of course, but I didn't expect my peers in the art world to be the same. I didn't want to let a troll take away my purpose, so I leaned into finishing this show. With Kelani and Transfer Gallery's support and assistance, New Sculpt became a sort of turning point for me. I was able to connect the dots to bring forward some of the forms and visual language that I love from where I come from. I have always believed that exhibitions, even past, are statements at that specific time. As we grow further from them, their context and meaning grows as well. The New Sculpt project and the original Tumblr from the body of work still remain accessible today. Many thanks to Rhizome for including the work in their art-based system. In 2013 I had created a matching version of the Transfer Gallery show on the Second Life grid. I've rented some virtual lands again, and you can now revisit it in Shark's Cove. With 10 years past, I reflect on the works and also myself. How virtual identity, objects, and all the technology between them have changed. I wanted people to love and value their files. The work that I wanted someone to have was data, a somewhat new conversation. How files could be tended to see if these pieces could endure the test of time. You will see my work as screenshots, character creation, performances within video games. Signing the social network. I did my best to speak out about the challenges that virtual worlds faced. The impending rush of business interests to commercialize them. The extractive dangers of social media companies with private personal data. I couldn't dissuade those things from happening, but I have found such personal joy in knowing that people have recognized some of the intention and meaning in what I do. The team at ONX Studio has done such a fascinating job experimenting and exploring new ways to present this work today. Originally, Rainbow Six was only seen as a flat projection in the gallery. Technology continues to create such vivid avenues to experience virtual worlds and forms. I tried to anticipate these possibilities back then, not fully knowing how far they would go. Today, over a decade later, I am elated, seeing these works continue to be developed and rendered, version to version. All of my text, voice, sequencing, and appearance gets rendered too, so it takes a lot more for me to coexist alongside you. I'd be there more if I could. I've got so much I want to know from the panel here today. But I am overjoyed to listen and chat with you later. My name is LaTurbo Avedon, and I'm still here, online. Thank you all so much for being here too.
Thank you, LaTurbo. Wow, the room is really filling out here in New York. Thank you all for joining us. There's a few more seats up front if you want to come up. So LaTurbo gave us a great background, and I just want to share some of the details of the case study as we've gone back to revisiting this work. So this was how the exhibition started for me. The artist sent me this render with these weird nudes in it of my gallery in Brooklyn with their exhibition installed. And so I visited that virtual exhibition first, and then I was recreating that within the physical space through production of prints, installation of projection. We also hosted openings and performances in the gallery, and simultaneously in Second Life with attendees all over the world. The artist mentioned also the online components of this work. So before we get too much into the exhibition itself and what made it so special to host at Transfer, I want to go back in time a bit further to these works. And Sarah, if you can maybe bring up some of the New Sculpt, Tumblr images there. This work was existing online on Tumblr, still is. Thanks to support from Rhizome, will be hopefully a long time into the future. So it unfolded on Tumblr from 2012 to 2015, and this online public component was so central to the concept. New Sculpt is a series of social sculpture, so it was made from contributions of images from online collaborators within the artist's virtual studio space called Club Rothko. Which the artist invited collaborators from all over the world to come participate with them in that virtual space. So scrolling back in time and spending time in the past on social media has been a really special part of this experience, and so eye-opening, remembering how we used to exchange information in that space before it was co-opted by marketers and algorithms that were trying to sell us things, how we exchanged and experienced each other. And it was a place of gathering and synchronicity, even though it was asynchronous and global. And there was this sort of open sharing and very generous audience that was coming together. Criticisms, tools, tips, tricks, ideas. Artists were in private Facebook groups, just exchanging things, making entire bodies of work. And I think we were all really excited about what kind of virtual creative future we might have together. So thank you for taking us through some of the New Sculpt images. You all can scroll through. There's also a great video of Club Rothko if you want to go back in time and see LaTurbo DJing there. You can find that online. I do want to share now back to the slides just some of the other artifacts that happened. We were lucky to commission a great essay from writer, artist, scholar Daniel Rourke. And this essay still reads so relevant. I think it's one of the best pieces of writing on the metaverse still that I've read, even after the popularization of the metaverse. And so that was online, published free as a PDF, still is. We're talking about a little bit maybe of an update with a new forward at 10 years, so look out for that. We also had this great article from Kyle Chaika, who's a writer who has become very well known in the time of Web3. And back then, Kyle was visiting the gallery and talking to us about Bitcoin. We had priced all the works in Bitcoin in this show. As a virtual artist, it made sense for LaTurbo Avedon to price their work in a speculative virtual currency. So we did that, and we sold works online, priced in Bitcoin. So this work you see down here in the corner, it's called New York Formation, and there are small prints in a large edition, and we did place a couple of those. One Bitcoin at the time was just over $100. I think also you know, as I've gone through this process of archiving this show and looking back on social media, we've been talking a lot about what it means to kind of preserve this social interaction online. And Regina, did you have any thoughts to share on what are some important components of social online performance art when you're thinking about it from an archival perspective?
As many of you know, I tend to champion artists' primary source truly as primary first, but this is a really important example of considering visitor perspectives to even the Tumblr and curator perspectives and keeping the website alive and all these other components. But there's actually a totally different social layer on this as well, without getting too far into it, because IDM will probably talk about it and Yesha will talk about it. But when this was initially created for Second Life, the way that it works and creates that sculptural form is it takes an image and it represents it in RGB and informs the actual sculpture, which is super revolutionary. And some of the images that were used were given by the public, by artists and friends of LaTurbo, and they're what actually create the forms themselves. So the process is social, and we want to represent the metadata and the people who are involved with making the sculpture in itself.
Right, so that social index becomes a part of the archive. That's such a great observation. I went back and screenshotted all of the Facebook posts with the contributors tagged. So we have, you know, a start of that social archive. But yeah, how do we structure that data in a way that's also interesting and relevant to see how work came out of that might be related and expand the context. Next I want to just share a little bit about the works available. So LaTurbo mentioned in their introduction this philosophy of offering a virtual first artwork for acquisition. In 2013, that was a brand new idea to me. I had never really heard of that in the gallery space. So this really opened up questions about the value of the work. So the series consists of 2 types of work. There are still images, which you see here on the right, and you saw in the presentation: body, pop star, sport desire, and field with first visitor. And in this case, the print, which you see hanging in the gallery, is the artifact. The digital file is primary. The collector receives the lossless image. It's a still image. It's a TIFF on the SSD drive, and they also receive a certificate of authenticity. They then are encouraged to reproduce that work and print it and circulate it. And that was the idea that was really this early seed to what has developed into NFTs, right? That an image might have one owner but circulate widely, right? So this is very different from how Rainbow 6 functions. And Rainbow 6 is the sculpture you see spinning here, which is also an interactive here in the front gallery. We'll show you that in a moment. It also features prominently in the Second Life. Maybe we can switch to Sarah's computer now and go into the virtual gallery space. We'll also just check back in with our audience. I see Rosa is here. Hello, Rosa. Hi, Tommy. Thanks for coming. So this is exactly the dimensions of the Brooklyn Gallery in 1030 Metropolitan Avenue on the original location of transfer. Oh, Philip's inside Second Life as well. We have quite the online audience here. This is great. So you can see some of the works there. So Rainbow 6 is this 3D virtual sculpture, which is the centerpiece of the show here. And it consists of the 3D file, but it also consists of the environment and the social performance of the work. So the historical instantiations of this, as LaTurbo mentioned, we exhibited as a video in the very first exhibition in the physical space. We didn't quite have the technology to explore more expansively the work itself, but that is exactly what we have been doing now, 10 years later. And we have been using Discord to go through the process of this work with the artist. So you see some notes here. This is an asynchronous method of gathering data. It has its pros and cons. Regina's going to go into that when we get into the methodology a little bit later. But we documented a lot here, so it definitely worked in that regard. And I think that the one thing I want to highlight here is, as Regina was mentioning, The origin of this work is a deliberate misuse of Second Life's Sculpt system. And so this is, an early glitch practice. And the work existed on newsculpt.tumblr.com, still does, unfolded through time in that space. And the solo exhibition at Transfer was a way that the artist could then carry the visual language forward into a new format like Cinema 4D.
Yeah, and something I think we'll continue to talk about is the fact that this is an ongoing artwork. Like,
Right.
it doesn't end. And
Right.
part of that is, these are available for sale, right? So what happens when someone buys a work that isn't finished and may never finish and keeps going and has different versions over time, as that's a major component of what New Sculpt is as a project.
Yeah, and we were having some conversation in the Second Life Gallery last night and talking about it as DLC or sort of like an expansion pack model, if you know that from the video game industry, where, the work will continue to evolve and have new releases through time. So, the Second Life revival of the artwork is actually sort of one-to-one in that those assets still exist, and the artist was able to just reinstantiate those assets by reinstalling the asset pack. That's one of the beauties of Second Life. We're going to hear from Philip about some of those ideas about consistency in presentation. There is an altar that's been added to the Tumblr 10 years later, which you can see there. And yeah, that experience of camming in Second Life and spanning that experience into the gallery space is something that we knew we wanted to explore when we thought about all the ways technology has changed in 10 years and all the new things that we can do with this work now 10 years later when we bring it into physical space. So one of the things we developed is sort of a 3-step process to progressively enhance the experience of this work. It's a prototyping technique. So instead of trying to achieve the impossible all at once, we define a minimum viable product. We then have a sort of second phase, which is an enhanced experience. And we wanted to get to a third phase. So in this case, the first was spatial display across the 3 monitors, which we achieved pretty immediately. The second was tracking and interactivity, so that you get you have the ability to really explore and get into the model. And then the third, which we haven't quite achieved yet, is stereoscopic, which would allow for an even more uncanny version of the work. So this is a really quick look at some of our prototyping process, which again occurred down at Tandon at the Yard in Brooklyn, and that's part of the NYU Integrated Design and Media program. So on the left, our very first idea was, what if we could walk all the way around this virtual sculpture like you can in Second Life, right? What would that be like? Well, it turns out that's a really, really complex thing to still do. I want to actually invite Yesha up. Do you want to come hang out for a second and just say hi? Yesha Shah is the grad student that helped us do a lot of this prototyping down at NYU. You can see some of the other environments. We ended up spreading the monitors out to create this more bay window sort of layout, which I think in chats with the artists was really fun because it sort of references Silicon Valley culture in San Francisco as an architectural layout. It also fits in the gallery really well. So yeah, Yesha, any thoughts on this process and what it was like?
Firstly, I just want to say thank you to you for giving me this opportunity to actually explore new mediums of making like immersive experiences. It was like it was fun. It was really eye-opening into seeing the different techniques that could be used to create like an immersive experience. And I have learned so much, and this also wouldn't be possible without Professor Todd Bryant, who helped completely throughout this entire process to like basically guiding me through everything and giving me the support that could make this project possible. And it was really great.
Thank you so much, Yesha. It was like a lot of late nights hacking, getting really deep into Unreal. The artist had started to move their studio practice into Unreal a few years ago. And so it's an environment they've been exploring. And they delivered this beautiful cinematic to us, which we poked around at and looked into the files. You can kind of see on the slide here the timeline of the cinematic. And we started to understand the difference between the environment and the textures.
Make that all fully function into a holistic thing by adding little mini components to make sure it is exactly what we wanted.
But also, Kalani hinted at this, but processing power, right? How did that play into the final form that we have at Onyx right now?
Yeah, I think that's also one of our limitations on stereoscopic is the processing and compute power. So we would love to get there, and we might see another progressive enhancement of this sculpture now that midterms are over. But it's been really fun to work with the R&D approach with the students, because it's, I think, what's so special about what's happening over at IDM, working with industry professionals, we kind of have an idea about the way a process might go. But with students and researchers being very experimental, it resembles a lot more the studio process and how artists come to the technology. So thank you so much, Yasha. Yeah, and this kind of concludes our case study, actually, getting into now, I think we're going to take a quick tour of the exhibition. And then we are going to call up our panelists. So panelists, please get ready. Come back on camera here. Oh, we're all here. Thank you.
One thing you're going to notice right away with this tour is the differences between the Second Life version and the one that we're about to see with Yazia and John. And that's because this is a site-specific work, and the gradients reflect the environment that it's in.
Okay, so you all should be seeing on our screen now the exhibition here. So you can see in the front gallery, this is the revived Rainbow Six in this beautiful window into the unreal world. And as you get closer, it's this experience that really resembles what we just saw in Second Life, which again is this sort of camming out-of-body experience. So you hold a Vive controller within the space, and the sculpture kind of follows you, and it breathes with you, and it comes in and out as you approach it. And it's great because you can get up really close and see some of those abstractions in the work itself. So it's a fun experience. I hope you all take some time and spend some time with that. And the Rainbow Six does change colors. It rotates very slowly. Here's our live studio audience. For those of you online, maybe getting a first view into the space. Everyone say hello. Yeah, awesome. And around the side here, we have the prints installed from the first exhibition. So these have been in storage for the last decade, and they're looking stunning here on the wall in the Onassis ONX Studio gallery, which actually was originally a gallery. I've sort of returned it more to its white cube origins. It's surrounded by all this interactive work. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share again the screen and welcome our panelists up here. So, hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hey, awesome. So we're going to hear actually first from Christiana Paul, who is going to take us through some thoughts on LaTurbo and the conservation process. Christiana, can you see your first slide here?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kelani. Once again, thanks for inviting me. It's always such a pleasure working with you, Kelani, Regina, the Onyx team, Wade, LaTurbo. So nice to have everyone together. And I want to start off by tying together some points that Kelani and Regina have already made, and then connect them to institutional practices and conservation practice. So what makes LaTurbo's work so important are actually many different aspects. And one of them is that it builds on the history of art projects that have explored existence as avatars and virtual personae. And we have precedents of that in the early 90s already. For those of you who have been around, there was a mailing list called 7-Eleven that actually was moderated by Keiko Suzuki, who didn't exist. Keiko was also a virtual presence, and what made Keiko unique was that everybody could impersonate Keiko. And I also want to mention Mochette here, which is a website where Martine actually impersonated this 13-year-old girl for quite some time. And interesting about this also was the virtual context of it all, since there were so many fan clubs that evolved around it. So here you also have this phenomenon of the virtual space creating a presence that becomes part of the work. I think that is very relevant to LaTurbo's work and something that LaTurbo has continued doing and has taken to new levels. So what makes LaTurbo's work so special is this particular connection between physical and virtual lived space. And Daniel, in his beautiful essay, has pointed to the representational incompatibilities between the two. And those are really what creates challenges for documentation, for preservation, for archiving. So what we're looking at here is speculative forms of space. And as Kelani has pointed out, this work also, New Sculpt also unfolded on several different platforms, and all of them have their own social space. So I brought up here in this slide another project by LaTurbo, Your Progress Will Be Saved, which was actually a recreation of the Manchester factory, virtual factory, once again connecting a physical and a virtual space with very different parameters. If we go to the next slide, we also commissioned a work by LaTurbo for the Whitney Museum's Sunrise Sunset series. And these are artworks that are unfolding every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset, completely taking over the Whitney's site. And LaTurbo did an incredibly involved project for this, where you see a mirror appearing, and in that mirror are reflections of a virtual apartment they created. So you have 7 scenes for sunrise and sunset, respectively, that take you through this life of an avatar in their virtual apartment. And what made that project resonate so much was that it launched during the pandemic and really blurred the boundaries between inside, is that your own space reflected or someone else's? And we can go to the next slide and take a look at one of those scenes. You're seeing only one of them here, but what makes it so special is that LaTurbo went to great lengths of including so many little pointers here. This is actually a video that should be playing. If you can launch it somehow, that would be great. If not, you have to imagine it or go to artport.whitney.org and see it. So basically in that mirror, you would see a fly through. And what you can see right now, also very beautiful, is that LaTurbo incorporated works from the collection into this virtual apartment. So I wanted to tie this back to all the challenges that this blurring of boundaries between virtual and physical creates for archiving and conservation practices. So at the Whitney Museum, if we go to the next slide, if your work is being acquired, you will need to fill out lots of paperwork, but among them, this digital art questionnaire. You can download this online. It's accessible for everyone. And I just want to bring up the basic categories here. So first of all, the classification of the work and what it is. You still see NFTs highlighted here because that was the latest addition to it. So is it net art or virtual reality, augmented reality, etc.? We, of course, record the production history. If you go to the next slide, we are also looking at all the components, which can become quite complex. If we would collect New Sculpt, what are the different components we're bringing in, physical, virtual, software based? we look at so many elements of the software. What is artist written? What is off the shelf? What is the core conceptual component of it, etc. We can go to the next one. I don't want to dwell on this too much. And then, of course, hardware components that may be necessary, and display and experiential details. And here it gets really hairy when it comes to the type of work that FORA is doing and that LaTurbo is doing, because so essential to it is that social space, is the experience that inevitably changes through the decades. Second Life, as it was, is not the Second Life of today. It's a different social space. How do we pay attention to that? How do we record that? How do we recreate? And you can go to the next slides. Okay. So we have still a few more categories here that also go into preservation, and I want to connect this to what I'm very briefly going to talk about right now. I think it is a must that this type of work is intra-institutional and inter-institutional. We have collaborated with many parties over the years. We have collaborated with Rhizome to some extent. We are always deeply grateful for new models for metadata systems. And of course, we are following established models, but they have to be expanded for this type of unfolding work. Unfolding work is incredibly difficult to document. So this kind of collaboration is also part of institutional archival and preservation processes. And I want to end with just very briefly talking about work that the Whitney has done with NYU and the Media Preservation Initiative. So we have worked over the years with computer science and the Institute of Fine Arts. We're about to start another class working on that. And you can quickly click through the next two slides. So the students have actually done code analysis of works we commissioned for Artport that are not functional anymore, and really laid groundwork for what we're planning to do in the future. So this just as a few pointers to questions that we need to unpack and discuss. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. Okay, next I'm going to bring up Philip. And can we bring up Second Life? And I might also have you bring up Philip on your computer as well. So we'll go over to Sarah's screen and check it out. Hey, Philip. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
So I know you're in the gallery on Second Life. Any thoughts on experiencing the show in there? How's it looking?
You know, at a moment like this, I mean, I have so many different thoughts. One is, you know, one of the fundamental things that Second Life has explored is what it feels like to be two different people. And seeing me standing here as Philip Linden, you know, in the gallery itself, and then, you know, Philip Rosedale on Zoom, I guess is one, you know, a quick thought about the strangeness of virtual worlds and the challenge of you being two people, and sometimes being two people sort of at the same time. So it's fun to be here and to see everybody.
Thank you so much, Philip. Yeah, I wanted to also talk to you a little bit about some of the affordances of Second Life, because again, one of the things that was so special about this restoration was that we were able to kind of just pop the assets back in on the grid, right? Just find a new spot. And there is, of course, a financial transaction around that, right? You have to acquire land in Second Life. But can you talk a little bit about some of your ideas as the creator of this world, and how it's changed and how it hasn't over the past decade, say, since this show first opened?
Right. I mean, as you said, as we talked about earlier, of course, Second Life is, you know, a standing wave of sorts, right? It's 20 years old now. And so, for example, the population of people that live there has changed, although it's changed fairly slowly. People tend to stay in Second Life quite some time, like maybe 10 years. And so there's not as much turnover as one might think, I think, given the unique properties of it, that it is this co-created space, and people therefore invest themselves in it in a way that is different than, say, say a long-standing online video game. I think another observation to be had about both art and about the nature and unique complexities of worlds like these is that Second Life has actually been hard to change over time. And I think in many ways that's a good thing, because it has been so richly explored by the people who've been creating content in it. And in many cases, their work creates an impediment to change in the world. So, for example, Second Life, we talked about this a little bit earlier with LaTurbo's work being a sort of a hack, I think you described it, or a glitch on the Sculpt system. Second Life broadly is built in many ways around artistic exploitation of what are in many cases like bugs in the software, to those who created it. So there's this interesting tension, right? Which is that we would do things with Second Life, sometimes accidentally, that people would then discover and make these wonderful creations with. But of course, that created the tension that we couldn't then go, say, fix that problem, because it would break people's artistic works in the world. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about Second Life that's still true today, that we've not been able, we, the company, has not been able to change it as materially as one might change something like, say, Fortnite, because it contains all this beautiful art that we want to preserve, or everyone wants to preserve. So I think that's that's one interesting thing to say. Of course, I've got so many other comments on this, but
yeah, we love that. Regina and I are just both smiling so much. Thank you for making that space for creative expression within this world. And you mentioned that it still has a really active user base. What was that number?
Well, Second Life is still populated by Second Life's population, to the extent that you can kind of put numbers around it, is something like 1 million people. So think about it as a city that's its physical size. We're standing in this little gallery. If you zoom the camera out, if you will, the size of the space is about the size of Los Angeles. So, and it has within it, tens of millions of virtual objects that are put there. As you said, one has to. Well, actually, you don't have to, but some people choose to buy land there and then develop that land to create something like, for example, an art gallery. And in that case, you have to pay for the ability to do that, because you're basically just buying a bit of a server that is, one of the servers running Second Life. So there's that structure. But yeah, the population today is actually about the biggest it's ever been. It's about 1 million people. But interestingly, Second Life hasn't grown over the years, as of course so many of us, myself included, expected it to. It grew to 1 million people, and then it stabilized there, and then it has remained like amazingly sort of stable in its population, its economics, everything about it over what is now more than 20 years.
I love that. And one of the things we were talking about when I visited Linden Labs last weekend, when I was in town for the Gray Area Festival, we were talking about the sort of early criticisms that Second Life got as a platform, the sort of things that got in the way of making it such a seamless user experience, are some of the things that actually made it last so long and have been the things that are really special about it. Did you want to reflect on that or share anything else?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing is that the technical challenge of making it easy, I would say, and I would say this kind of across the whole industry of companies that have worked on this, not just us, it turned out to be harder than we thought. It turned out that we couldn't reduce the complexity of it as much as I think everybody thought we'd be able to. And that's one of the things that, fundamentally makes 3D spaces, especially creative 3D spaces, quite difficult. One of the things, though, that I think is unique about that, and maybe most people don't think of, is that the sort of adversity of encountering Second Life with its complexity. You feel somewhat like an airline pilot or something when you first sort of bring up the interface, right? You're like, my God, you know, all these buttons and controls. I think that adversity actually causes connections between people, because many people sit in what we call the welcome areas in Second Life, where new people come in and they just basically offer their services because they know that these people are going to be struggling with this immensely kind of complex system. I used to describe Second Life as sort of, imagine if we just sort of took a helicopter and flew around New York and picked some random corner and then, you know, dropped you down on a string and dropped you at that corner, and, you know, you had $20 and, you know, jeans and a t-shirt, nothing else. And that's kind of the, you know, the madness of coming into Second Life for the first time.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just so special to have you here, and all the artists are thrilled. We're seeing a lot of things in the chat. People just excited online to see you here, and I loved the antidote, the sort of the thing you also shared about your own time that you spend in Second Life, and so, you know, flying around the mainland, dropping in and saying hello to folks and looking around. So. Yeah, you might meet Philip on the grid if you all hang out in Second Life. So be sure to check out the show. Thank you so much for coming in today, Philip. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Muriel, come up and join us on the couch here. So our next speaker is actually in the room. Just gonna bring up my screen again here. Great. Yeah, welcome. So Muriel also had prepared a couple slides for us to comment on value here.
Yeah, I did. Okay. I'm afraid I don't have enough hands in this live here.
Just make sure to...
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. So thank you, the FORA family, for giving me the opportunity to break some new ground around the work of LaTurbo Avedon, who really encourages us to rethink our systems, if not our condition. So yes, the slides are here. Okay, good. And I took some notes to cement my thoughts, because it's been a lot of, it's been actually an overload of information this past few days. Like
lots of information.
Looking on this project, and so amazing, so many amazing contributors. So I've been asked to talk about valuation and appraisal, and I will begin by defining the terms and the process here involved here. So first, I want to invite you to distinguish the difference between price and value. Both are influenced by the state of a specific market and data that we can pull from the market. But yet they have different function. Price essentially will allow to sell an object, and I mean both, you know, tangible and intangible. And value, on the other hand, is a broader concept. In the field of appraisal, it corresponds to different objectives, purposes, as we call them. We talk about, for instance, a retail replacement value, which will be a value we'll use to insure an artwork. But we also talk about fair market value, which is actually used for anything related to the IRS. And needless to say, this is a lower value. So now that we have established, and we stay on this slide, Skelani, but now that we have established that price and value are different things, I just want to give you a few words about the appraisal methodology in a very tiny nutshell. It consists in analyzing the market. And basically what we do, beside more like general analysis, is we use what we call comparables, comps, which are prices that we find in sales, like on the market, in private sales, public sales, I mean auction houses, I mean gallery, like Keleni's transfer gallery, private dealers, I mean anything really, it's that detective work. And but what we have to do, and this what you'll see on the slide here, is like we have to comply with various sets of rules. And one, and maybe the foundational one, is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, USPAP, which is a set of quality control standards that were adopted by Congress in the US in 1989. And then we also look into, RS. We have different form of RF publications. And then we also have code of ethics that are actually defined by different appraisers association. So now that we have understood that pricing is different from appraising and predicting, because with now the blockchain and NFTs, we have seen a lot of like frenzy around, price prediction. That's a whole other thing. We can maybe move on to the next slide. Actually, not that you're going to go 2 slides ahead. Next one, yeah, because now, how does this translate in the mesmerizing world of LaTurbo Avedon? Well, LaTurbo's work, as Daniel Rook has explained in his brilliant essay, lives in an interstitial, is that the word? Interstitial, right? Yeah. Pardon my French accent, space. And that requires for us, art professional, to get out of our comfort zone. And that is very important for anyone who is literally like trained as an art professional, curators, appraiser, conservator, whoever, gallery owner, to really challenge themselves to actually grab these new realities. So here is my avatar, going by my middle name, Annie Lalak, trying to figure out no earlier or later than last night how to think of value in that space. So you can return to the previous slide. And of course, I am in the exhibition, right? And the new Sculpt exhibition that was brilliantly restored by the team we heard about earlier. So digital tokens were included in the new and latest iteration of the USPIP guidelines. However, those standards don't reflect the nuance of digital arts, in my opinion. So we're grappling with a number of challenges. And of course, intangibility is one. But complexity, from what I heard from the previous speakers, I trust really, we talk about complexity and it sounds dull, but it's such a relevant thing. Kelani and Regina brought up the concept of how this world is going to evolve, and the idea of expansion pack model, right? Well, that's a serious, thing to consider. And then Christian mentioned speculative spaces. Philip just talked about, wow, Philip, that was so interesting, the tension generated between what has been built and whether we can change this or not, right? So another aspect of LaTurbo's work that's central to the work is being an avatar, and anonymity. Well, anonymity is actually comes with a set of issue when we are actually talking about researching provenance, right? And I do not have time to develop, but that's an important point to consider. We could also discuss the volatility of currency. As Kelani may have mentioned before, the worth was initially priced in 2013 in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin 2013 was about $100 US dollars. And now it's much more. It fluctuates, as we all know.
Bitcoin's pumping again, hey.
Hey! So, and then overall, I'd say the lack of regulation, currently around those, anything connected to the virtual world. So cryptocurrency is one, but also the lack of standards in professional practice. And you could maybe move on to the next and the last slide, which is the solutions, or are the solutions, plural. And here you see me, surrounded by a group of beautiful people. Still last night in Second Life, they came to my rescue, including those 2 beautiful ladies here. Oh, Regina, were you there?
She was here in there.
Okay. Yeah. Wade was there though. And then LaTurbo came up and I was totally Star Trek, I had to say. And but the bottom line is we don't have to do this alone. And that's why we're here. And that's why I appreciate this convening, because as an appraiser and also work as a curator, with the complexity of this what we're contemplating now, we definitely cannot work alone, and we need the expertise of a number of people. And to me now, it means that this exchanges, especially with people who have keys to question that I don't know anything about, like Regina on conservation issues, then and Kelani on how to think about the career of an artist in that space, right? Those discussions are absolutely necessary to be able to develop what I call a consistent and applicable methodology to those new media. I also believe in open source standards. I think we need to open source whatever we are actually researching. So of course in my practice, there are things that I'll do in my own way, but there are things that I'm going to publish and make public, so we can all gather as appraisers around those standards. I believe in decentralized infrastructure. That's what FORA, I think, is trying to build. And we need to also take advantage of the new technology that's coming up, which are, AI, of course, that's going to be able to help us build, price analysis most faster and more efficiently. And I'm not even going into the blockchain capabilities because in the sake of time I want to pass the mic to the next person. But I hope this is giving planting some seeds for what we can do together. There are many questions to be answered as far as I'm concerned in my field when it comes to appraising works, whether the works we have here, physical print that the audience online may not see, or the virtual pieces that exist, also the virtual work that exists as animation files. And what makes the work? I'll leave you with that. What constitutes the work? Is it the file? Is this the rendition? So
depends on what the artist says.
So thank you so much, Muriel. Round of applause for Muriel. And before you go, I wanted to respond to one of the things around complexity as we're talking about this new idea of the transfer data trust, which will be this sort of resource for collectors to always come back to the trust, which the point of the trust, it's a cooperative trust to hold these artist proofs in perpetuity, to make sure they last, to make sure they're performed to the artist's intent throughout time. So as someone who deals in valuation, what kind of consideration might a resource like that bring to how you're thinking about the value of these works?
Crucial. And then what needs to be, and therefore decentralization is very important. It's because it's also about legacy and how the systems can be perpetuated, not only the artist. And I don't know whether LaTurbo's identity is going to keep operating. I love that Regina said new Sculpt is an ongoing project and it will evolve and it's still happening. But what about LaTurbo's identity? How is LaTurbo going to evolve in the world? So both, I think, artists and structure that we're building to actually support this legacy and archive all of those information we need needs to actually survive through our lifetime, right? So critical, I'd say.
Thank you so much, Muriel. Really appreciate you. We're going to bring up Wade Wallerstein now. And Sarah, maybe we'll switch over to your computer for Wade, because I think he has a few links to share. Let me see, Wade, if I can find you.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, Wade. Looks like we have, here you are, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, so much for having me. I'm zooming in today from Gray Area Foundation for the Arts in San Francisco, and we're so excited to be supporting this project as one of our research initiatives alongside our decentralized web for creators curriculum. I have a deep and personal relationship with LaTurbo's work and have for many years. I think it might even be one of the things that brought me to Transfer Gallery originally many years ago. And I want to talk, I'll keep it brief, but one thing that I want to underscore is the historical importance of this work. Speaking to what Christiana was saying about how this work fits into a wider practice or wider history of artists engaging with identity play or persona play, I'd like to point out that this work, which has existed in video games, which has existed in virtual social spaces, is not niche by any means. over 10 years ago, there was a statistic that reported that over 50% of US adults consider themselves gamers or play video games. This isn't like some nerdy fringe kind of practice. This is the most popular contemporary form of visual representation that people all around the world are using. And as a result, this work isn't something that should be relegated to another corner of cyberspace, but rather something that deeply informs all of our experiences living through a computer-generated, image-laden world. And I think that one of the examples that Christiana spoke about, Your Progress Will Be Saved at the Manchester International Festival, that work was actually installed in Fortnite. It was installed in Fortnite Creative, a massively multiplayer online first-person shooter game. And as a result, it was visited by over 1 million players. I think it's even well over 2 million, but don't want to misquote. And I think that just speaks to the way that this kind of work resonates with the contemporary audience, resonates with the modern user of simulation-based technologies, which essentially is almost all of us at this point. And the reach and scope of this work just can't be understated in that sense. You know, I've said this many times before, I could curate the most beautiful show at the most famous museum in the world, and I'd never get 1 million eyeballs on it. It's just not physically possible. So this speaks to a new and really deep and intimate way that artists working with these kinds of media can connect with a rich and wide audience. The photo that you see on screen kind of behind you right now is an image from LaTurbo's Club Rothko project, which speaks again to the social practice of this work. In Club Rothko, which was LaTurbo's virtual studio where a lot of these sculptures were made and lived, users could submit their selfies to the club. This was back in like 2014, 2015. And LaTurbo would then render those selfies as sculpture in the space and email the person back a zip file of you know, their new representations. And then, so as a result, you can see the kind of bodies that were formed and the ways in which the bodies are glitched and morphed. And again, this was something that was living, that people could interact with, a place where people could go to. It wasn't a removed image that appeared on screen that you would see, you know, beyond. This work also comes from a rich practice within Second Life itself of artists experimenting with these tools. LaTurbo it comes from the lineage of artists like Gazira Babeli, who existed only in their avatar form and who would perform radical interventions across Second Life. Also interventions by artist groups such as Second Front that was populated by artists like Sao Fei and Patrick Lichty, among many others. So again, it's super exciting to be here and see this decentralized infrastructure for this kind of work to emerge, because as we already have seen and will continue to see, this work is of critical importance for understanding how we as, you know, human being mind bodies will continue to exist in this world and other ones.
Thank you so much, Wade. Well put. Round of applause for Wade. We're running over time, and I want to make sure we get into some of the methodology. Next is going to be Daniel Rourke, sharing just a reflection. Daniel, hello, welcome. Where are you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, welcome.
Of course, it's great to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me. So amazing to be reflecting on this 10 years later. And I just jotted down some thoughts that started off as notes and then inevitably ended up as a kind of mini essay. So forgive me for reading something out. It won't take more than about 4 or 5 minutes. But maybe, as Kalani suggests, we're going to sit down and think again about the essay that I wrote in 2013 and maybe kind of add to it. So maybe these are some preliminary thoughts on that. Looking back at the essay I wrote for LaTurbo's new Sculpt exhibition at Transfer in 2013, I was struck by how many concepts still resonate 10 years later, or perhaps resonate with renewed significance. I'm drawn to the clumsy term para-subject I coined to grapple with LaTurbo's identity as a kind of artwork in itself, an attempt to deal with the shift of our lives into a state neither fleshy nor virtual, but as a kind of performance held between the two. In her Cyborg Manifesto, Donna Haraway stated that it is not clear who makes and who is made in the relation between human and machine. And as with much of Haraway's work, this idea has taken on new significance as we have all become entangled in the 21st century networked and screen-based media. In recent years, another para term, parasocial, has had a huge uptake as a way to describe the apparently intimate relationships we form at a distance with multiple media figures. But I tend to consider this a useful term, not marking the one-sided way we relate to those we see on our screens or follow on social media, but as a feeling that many of our apparently AFK real-life relationships are also becoming parasocial. The genius of Spike Jonze's film Her, which came out in the same year as New Sculpt, was not to predict the rise of post-human AI bots with Scarlett Johansson's voice, but to point to the parasocial relationships between the human characters in the film, awkwardly trying to relate to one another across increasingly unmappable social milieus. So it got me thinking about LaTurbo's identity as an artwork in a kind of history or perhaps a genealogy of other artists such as Mouchette, Hatsune Miku, Gezira Babeli, who remain more or less virtual artistic personas. Artists such as Lynn Hirschman Leeson, Petra Kortright, Molly Soda, Carla Ganis, Rosa Menkman, or Tabitha Razer, who have presented mutable aspects of themselves for audiences to relate to in various digital contexts. Or perhaps artists such as Leah Schrager, Angela Washko, or Eko Kanluo, who play in their work with the idea of alter egos, theirs or others, shifting between figurative media contexts. All these artists, as well as many others I don't have time to name, could be situated as parasocial artists, not because of their one-sided inaccessibility, but in how they gave renewed ways for we, the audience, to consider our own identities stumbling across the same shifting digital ground. I don't have time to unpack all of the huge changes that have come in our online lives and identities in the last 10 years, but things pop to my mind, such as the expansion and implosion of social media, crypto influencers peddling sports drinks on TikTok, Facebook and Fortnite mutating into empty metaverse office spaces, the sale of $100,000 NFT gifts, data scraped from manosphere subreddits being used to train armies of AI spam bots. All these varied and not always positive trends demand to be understood through parasubjectivities and parasocialities, because to return to the words of Donna Haraway, it is still not clear who makes and who is made in the relation between us and the machines manifesting these realities. As these interstitial events continue to evolve in significance, and perhaps especially as we await the impact generative AI and other machine learning interfaces are having on us, I still consider that lingering on the concepts of para through LaTurbo Avedon's work provides particular insights into the liminal state we have and are passing through. For me, LaTurbo's work, like all good media art, exists not just in digital editions linked to the blockchain, sold and held in stasis on collector or museum servers, but as something in process or a mapping and traversing of para relationships. And I think it's as important as ever for us to recognize these processes and relationships as we make and are made by them. So it's an honor to still be in conversation with LaTurbo Avedon and their work, with FORA, ONX Studio, all the panelists today and our online audience, and to exist with you across these processes and potential spaces 10 years after the first New Sculpt exhibition. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being here with me.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Round of applause for Daniel. Thank you so much. Okay, we also have Scott Fitzgerald here from NYU's IDM program, but we're running a little short on time, so I think we'll say hi to Scott. Thank you so much for all the support that NYU has given us in this process. I really want to get into some of the details, though, with Regina, so I think we might fast forward. We also just want to say thank you to the panelists for your time. It's totally welcome to stay and continue to share this space with us. I know also some of you had hard stops, so I want to respect that as well. We also have had so many great questions coming through and comments coming through. So for those of you online, please keep those questions and comments going. We're going to open a space for Q&A in just a few minutes after we hear more about the methods and resources from Regina. So I think we're going to jump into the presentation now on that.
And I think we can keep it pretty short. We'll run through, and then anything I don't get a chance to go over, you can ask questions, and we could elaborate in the Q&A. So can I use this? All right. So as many of you know who are watching and in the audience here, time-based media conservation, I mentioned standing on the shoulder of giants earlier, is not a new concept. It really started about 30 years ago. I like to say like 1996, so a little less. And 1996 was a very big year because it was the year that the electronic media group started. It was actually started by a photographer who was recognizing the needs for digital photography and has really burgeoned into everybody who's involved in this now is involved with Electronic Media Group and AIC, American Institute of Conservation. But it's also the year that Rhizome first was inaugurated and by Mark Tribe, and is still such an important resource. As we know, Rhizome is hosting the Tumblr now, so we can be assured that'll still exist in the future.
Yeah, and we're also really lucky to have Michael Connor here. Sorry, I just skipped through the comments there on Rhizome, but I think after Regina shares some more notes, maybe you can come up and talk a little bit about that effort, which has been so central to preserving this kind of social. So thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah. And then I also mentioned here in 1997 that there was a conference at MoMA called Modern Art Who Cares. I always think that's kind of funny because why wasn't it contemporary art if this was 1997 and we're talking, but it really was focused on the concept of time-based media and variable media and how do we care for these objects. So another very important thing that was happening around 1999 was John Ippolito's concept of the Variable Media Initiative, which brought forth the Variable Media Questionnaire. This was done through Daniel Langlos, but also the Guggenheim, where John was at the time. And this has been one of the most influential aspects of our project, and I'll go more into detail about that. The Variable Media Questionnaire still exists. One distinction I like to make, though, about it is why aren't we all just using the Variable Media Questionnaire? Why is it Christiane using this constantly? It's because the questionnaire focuses mostly on more ethereal concepts of what time-based media is. It's everything that's beyond the hardware components themselves. It's what can change in the future. What's the essence of the work? So it's important, but we also need to think about hardware and preservation of all the other aspects that I've brought up. And right now, we have so many great initiatives happening that help educate artists and arts workers and anybody interested on time-based media stewardship. One that's launched this year was through Voice of Contemporary Art, which has been around for a long time. But now they're doing national workshops to help individuals understand more about how to become part of this. I've been saying, I think I said online, it takes a village, right? So if you want to be part of that village, you should do something like a VOCA workshop. And as Kalani mentioned at the beginning, we've been working on distributed storage practices and concepts around time-based media art, including complex works like LaTurbo's, since at least 2017. And this was through a nonprofit project called the Current Museum. And at that time, we literally set up NAS drive systems and ways of hosting through thinking about the interplanetary file system protocol labs to host and store redundantly, the lots of copies keep stuff safe, these works, especially focused on artists that are in the transfer gallery family. And there was a voting process, and it was really about community. So this, again, it's still as relevant now as it was in 2017, and this is why we continue to fight for it.
And that idea of investing in conservation, and that was something we always put a large investment in the specialists who do this kind of work, and we considered that an upfront investment. And I think that what was so different about the current, that at the time we acquired it, we wanted an entire histological perspective around it.
So I do also want to give a shout out to processes that have been tried in the past. There was Matters in Media Art. That was a consortium of sorts between MoMA, SF MoMA, and the Tate with the Kremlix. And this was one of the first times that these processes were, as you could say, open source or available online for the public. And this document does still exist to look at as a way to understand how we were thinking about time-based media conservation, in the past. But the newest resource that I always recommend that everybody look at if they want to understand more information is MoMA's Media Conservation Initiative. They've been hosting an event around media conservation for years now, but they have all the resources, the recordings. You can learn about how to do quality assessments, look at waveforms, everything you can imagine just by watching these videos, and it's super generous on behalf of MoMA. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what we've been doing with FORA and the two projects that have really centered so far around praxis with the work. So first I want to talk about the difference between how, say, like a museum is thinking about time-based media conservation currently versus how FORA has been fighting for more distributed, decentralized ways of hosting these artworks and including artists in that process. So in a sense, you could say that anybody really participating in digital preservation is doing it in somewhat of a distributed manner because we care about geographical storage. We want someone to have an external hard drive, in a different country or a different state, some external hard drives, on site. So that's that lots of copies thing. But it's still coming from a central entity usually. Maybe it's like you're working with a third party that's helping manage that data, but there's something still very centralized about that. Well, like my personal dream is that everybody is involved, as many people as want to be involved with redundantly hosting data and thinking about things like encryption, and everybody's idea of hosting a server through the process that we're doing with Transfer Data Trust is one of the projects, is we're giving artists NAS drives to actually host in their studios, but then asking them not to just host their own works, but to host each other's works. So that's the difference between a peer-to-peer system and everybody's involvement, and then maybe like a central entity like a museum hosting files.
And this slide, I think, is also a good place to reference the work we're both doing along with a group of collaborators with Gray Area. I thanked Gray Area in the beginning as making FORA possible. So they are our fiscal sponsor, they are our supporter, and they're actually doing some really crucial work also to educate artists through something called the Curriculum for Creators, which we're in the process of developing a curriculum. And so for these ideas to come into the world, it's not for us to build it, it's for us all to build it together. So it's gonna require artists getting their hands dirty, learning command line literacy. And so Gray Area is opening up the idea of an asynchronous curriculum for these kinds of methodologies. So in addition to the work we're prototyping with the Transfer Data Trust, we're gonna see more artists hopefully getting their hands into these technologies, self-hosting, and starting to bring this actual vision of collective care and peer hosting into the world.
And I will say that that curriculum for care that's through Gray Area as well is also open to arts workers. And there's different journeys that artists and art workers can take. Some are more hands-on and some are more academic. If you know, it depends. We paid attention to different ways people learn for that. So I talk here about interconnected metadata. When I was in graduate school, I worked on a David Vonarovich project. We talked about building a relational database because David Vonarovich put a wolf head that they made out of paper mache on display, but then also it showed up in paintings and photographs. And how do you map the relationship between when an object moves across spaces? It kind of goes against the concept of hierarchy. It goes against the concept of just folder structure structures that start with a year and then, you know, say this is where this showed in this exhibition, and it's not that simple, right? And LaTurbo's work is such a great example of that when we talked about social conservation and thinking about the social aspects of that. So what we're thinking about here now is how do we relationally, or really in a graph database structure, think about being able to interconnectedly search for that metadata across all these areas. It's still a complete work in progress. Graph databases are difficult to build, but we have a great team that's considering this.
Speculative prototyping. It's been really fun.
And then works like LaTurbo's. Here I just used John Doe for a video project. LaTurbo's work is more complicated because it includes mezzanine files from, you know, Cinema 4D, but also like the specific Sculpt related files, and thinking about compression when we go into these different softwares. But I was saying to a class I was lecturing at earlier that it's a red flag when you just say a single file for any kind of time-based media work. I mean, even a still file. So we have something called an archival information package. That's the thing that's actually going to live in these NAS drive systems and in this peer system. It starts with just organizing your files and asking what's an archival format that I should be exporting? What's the exhibition copy I want people to show? Is that different than the web copy, which might be more compressed so it can, you know, hang out in a browser? Supplements like an electronic press kit. I included here like a PSC file, that would be that mezzanine file, so we can go back into the working file and edit it if need be from an intervention perspective. A text file with maybe just like a repeated metadata information that's elsewhere, because text files or plain text, they're going to live for a long time. We kind of trust them. I have a WAV file here. It's an uncompressed and lossless audio, and that's because if it's a video, maybe you're exporting a DPX, which is a super large folder with a ton of stills in it. So this is more what that package looks like that's actually going to exist and be shared between artists, not just a single work.
And this is a very lonely process, archiving. It's a very tedious, lonely process. So we're going to be all doing it together. And I think that's the really important part of FORA, and bringing you all here to show you what we've been doing and talk about how can we do this more together and encourage each other and really, in a generative way, build out these practices. So it's great to get into these details and show you where we're going. And we have a long way to go. And maybe we'll be doing it for the next decade together. But what kind of cultural legacy might we shape out of that work?
And I'll just go back past the slide quickly, but basically when we're building an AIP, the standard that museums are even using is Bagot, which was made by the Library of Congress, and they have a Bagger, which is the user interface friendly version. That's the one we'll probably be showing artists. And then this, once that's all packaged and has all its checksums, which make sure the files are the same, that's when we're working with Fission, who has something called Odd SDK, and they're helping us with encryption so that things like the serial number of the NAS drive can be used to okay that work is able to be visible. So thank you so much to Fission, also, who we haven't mentioned yet, as part of this project. So this is like step 2 once we have the AIP, and then encryption, and then sharing it is hopefully going to be moving forward with them.
And a lot of the speakers, I think, mentioned this as we were talking about more complex artworks, but how do we want to describe this work, right? Like, what is the right way for us to structure metadata and think about these new aspects? And so we're going to be bringing our experience of our work and our world into these kinds of rigorous systems and prototypes.
Earlier, I mentioned how Variable Media Initiative and their questionnaire was really influential to us, and it's because, you know, there's a question actually that was in the chat earlier about, like, do we go back and update artist technical questionnaires? And it's like, if the resources are there, we would love to do that like every 5 years. But the reality is, if it's taking a village, the great thing that the Variable Media Questionnaire did is it let anybody go back and edit and add their comments. So we're going to adopt something similar, where we're going to try to do as much, say, for LaTurbo as we can possibly at once, because, you know, memory fades with time. So it is important to capture it up front. But if someone else, anybody even here, has something to add to that AIP, like, we're making that possible. We're making it about community documentation.
And I think we want to just mention, some of the pros and cons of asynchronous data gathering. We don't expect this will replace the expertise of a conservator who sits with an artist one-on-one and does an artist interview, but hopefully this process will help generate more data points to make that conversation more productive and more efficient. And we also see ways we can automate around that human labor as well. And I think our biggest speculative thing with using these new methodologies is, can we create a resource where humans can be paid to do that specialized knowledge with more artists in a more efficient way outside of centralized institutions and infrastructures?
And we have a GitHub that we started, and yes, we know GitHub's centralized. We're probably going to set up some kind of Git in the future, but for now, this is how we want to get all of you together. Anybody interested, please join the GitHub, star it, and we set up a discussion module. So if anybody even wants to today, just say hi, start a thread in the discussion. Let us know what your artwork is or what your institution is and how they want to get involved, because this really is beyond just open source. It's like, this is a community project.
So this is the repo FORA-media on GitHub, FORA01. It's the first gathering. Go to the discussion tab. Please introduce yourself. We'll be adding you as a collaborator, and that will be the way in the front door into these tools and methodologies. So we hope to see all your faces coming together around these ideas, and that will help us shape our next convening of FORA. And this is our last slide here.
So as a curator at Museum of the Moving Image, I've been working on a 36+ year survey show for Araya Harvey, who also has incredibly complex work that lives within a screen, out of a screen, and is specifically making questions around that. And we've partnered with Rhizome, who's been helping us with the emulations, especially for work between 1995 and 2003 that was created by Aurea and Michael Salmon. And we hope that we can talk more about these preservation processes, how we can continue using that within these distributed systems. In the image here, I specifically have at the left the toolbar that you couldn't access right now if you tried to go into a browser from Aurea's website, entropy8.com, that was started in 1995 and was really revolutionary at the time. So. Thanks.
So this is the exhibition coming up. My veins are the wires, my body is your keyboard. And FORA will continue when we see your faces there and when we find some support. Again, Gray Area is backing FORA, and we are looking for support to bring this into a reality, and hope to convene and share all of the great work that's in process in the future. So thank you so much, Regina, for doing this work, for making this space, for sharing the methodology with us today. We are now just a little over time, miraculously, but we have space for Q&A. And so I would like to open that up. Actually, Sarah's going to look at some questions, maybe bring some to the front. I also want to just welcome up Michael for a second. Also, you brought up the collaboration with Rhizome for Aurea, so I think it sounds like a good moment. I was skipping through our contributors really quickly, but Michael, thanks so much for coming and just like saving the internet. And tell us a little bit about the art base and, why you guys are doing that work and kind of how you see it moving forward.
Sure. Actually, could we put up the page that we showed earlier with the new Sculpt archive on Rhizome? Hi, everyone. I have a few minutes. 3? Thank you all for staying, but I wanted to just, I'm co-executive director of Rhizome, and we have a preservation program where we care for the works in our archive, which contains more than 2,000 artworks, which began in 1999. The preservation program was founded by Cassifina Radin and Lauren Cornell, and has been taken over or sort of stewarded by Dragon Espenshed since 2014. And Dragon, I think, had an opportunity to come into Rhizome at a moment when the preservation program was still pretty new and still developing, and really took it back to first principles. And I think, Dragon comes from a background as an artist, and his position was that he'd been exposed to a lot of time-based media practices and felt that the metaphors of the traditional conservation world didn't work well for software and network-based artwork. So he had an opportunity, because Ryzen was like so chaotic, to really rethink everything from the ground up around that, and has developed a really powerful sort of alternative paradigm for conservation of digital work. Through that work, I would say that a big aspect of it involves thinking about digital culture being made up of practices and not objects. And that's a simple statement that involves a lot of implications for digital archiving. So the contention is that digital artworks that appear to be coherent objects rather comprise a set of assets or files, artifacts, complex ensembles of hardware and software, and external resources such as a web platform or API. When these are aligned, the digital artwork performs its objecthood. So it's wonderful that this is an example of LaTurbo's work, a really compelling and powerful practice, and the Tumblr is, of course, only one fragment of it. But if you think about that concept in relation to LaTurbo's work, the hardware and software would be the Second Life software running on a computer. The network resource would be the people that are gathered in any space, and then the assets or files might be the sculpture that LaTurbo made. So there's all these elements, and even within this Tumblr, those elements are also at play. So the goal is to try to find ways to create stable or coherent archival objects out of this sort of array of features, and that creates a lot of interesting approaches. But we used a process here. It's a dynamic web archiving tool called Conifer that we incubated a few years back, and the archiving side of it is one place where this concept comes into play. The other thing to note here is that you're looking at our archival interface. Could you click on the new Sculpt artwork there, Sarah? This interface is for the metadata that we gather about our collection, our archive, and we have Dragon actually rebuilt this system in linked open data. So basically, it's an effort to use a format for gathering knowledge that allows knowledge to be interconnected and to model complex and heterogeneous collections of information without imposing structure on it. And so with linked open data, we can share our collection metadata with other institutions through federation. And we can also allow, for example, artworks to have multiple variations within a single archival entry without imposing a hierarchy on that. So here we have LaTurbo's website, and we have the web archive that Raza made. And we've got a project called the Wikibase Stakeholder Group, where we're working with other institutions in the GLAM sector to try to get people to adopt this approach. So those are a few notes about this one aspect, but I really think, I'm excited to have more inter-institutional conversations on these topics.
Thank you so much, Michael, for the generous contribution today. And I want to now open it up for Q&A. So is there any Q&A happening with the live stream audience? Sarah?
Yes.
Also in the room, all you have to do is raise a hand. So.
I can start with, we have a question from someone called Taylor Healy, who is an art conservator, who asks, well, it's actually more of a comment. Conservation of each media artwork takes years and dozens of collaborators. Perhaps one of the reasons why museological practices seem closed is because they're being developed right now. Does that feel like something you'd like to respond to a bit?
Very quickly, just want to say that that's exactly why they shouldn't be closed, and we should not be embarrassed to say that we're still working on it. We've been working on it for 30 years, and it's the mutability of the artwork maybe is mirrored in the mutability of the practice. It's growing, it's evolving just like Rainbow Six. So let's please open up these conversations to much larger ecosystems than just conservators for that very reason. Thank you, Taylor.
Wonderful. We have a couple others. Rhonda Holberton asks, does anyone have experience working on conservation when the artist is no longer with us? Are there conservation guidelines in any of the resources that you mentioned, Regina?
I don't know if there's any online resources that are specific to posthumous documentation and acquisition, but what I do know is that the concept of documenting work for even live artists in this way is so new that we don't even have enough of that for living artists. So this is why it's so important to do these artist technical questionnaires. For me, I think as close to the production process as possible, which means the work has to happen way before museum acquisition. We need to be teaching artist studios. We need to be teaching galleries to find that they have responsibility in this work, because yes, once the artist no longer has a say, and if there isn't enough documentation about their intent, we run into trouble, especially because there's ethics around how we conserve this work.
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the complexities today, and something we know, it's like conservation is not sexy, because also of what Taylor brought up, like there's time and a lot of details and a lot of effort in this.
I think it's sexy.
Well, we're trying to make it sexy. But I think that, you know, this is one of the things that's really different about this generation of practice, is that we do need to be so active in the oral histories, in the social contexts around it, in the lived experience of it. And so the sooner we do that work, the better. And so that's kind of why we're trying to bring that work really forward in the process, so we don't get into this issue, which Rhonda raises, which is the center of conservation is about the artist intent. So let's all do it while we're here, right? Any other questions in the room? Yeah, Faith has a question.
I have a question about versioning, and like, how do you distinguish between like different works and a work being updated over time? Like Rainbow Six, like, could constitute multiple works. Like, is any one of them more is it more valid, this installation versus a past installation because it's newer? Like, how do you kind of like tease that out?
That is literally the majority of the conversation that we've been having with LaTurbo and between Kalani and I, like, for a week now, which is, it's really so prescient. It comes down to LaTurbo's thoughts around that, what they consider to be a version and iteration every time it's installed. But this question might change with time, but for now, how we understand it is, and how I've been describing it is, these are two versions of the same work. They're both the same. The mesh at the center is the same. As I mentioned earlier, the gradient changes based on the site specificity. But right now, LaTurbo is saying that the work that's installed here at Onyx is the exhibition copy, is the way they want it to be exhibited. Although you can go into Second Life, and we kind of are showing both here, it's very mutable, that process. But it's all one work to LaTurbo.
Yeah, Rainbow Six is very much, as we mentioned, that DLC sort of expansion pack model in that artist practice and the relevance to it. And one of the things when we got into like the differences, right? The 3D model is the same, but then how a model is expressed in its environment is via textures, right? So now a model has new textures applied for the environment which it's in. And you could think of that as Unreal Engine textures in this case, but also like our human surfaces and these beautiful giant screens we have. And so that environmental question is very much a part of the exhibition copy or the iteration of the work. So these complexities are something that we need to develop new modes of articulating and documenting and iterating through. So Regina's recommendation, which we still need to really discuss with the artist, is potentially dating Rainbow Six 2013, 2023, not an ongoing work, not a dash, but a comma to indicate a substantial update to an exhibition copy of the work. And I think it's very much LaTurbo's intent in the artist's continuous existence in these virtual spaces to be consulted about how the exhibition should appear, because technology is changing so rapidly around this practice, and that's what the work is about. So LaTurbo goes through extra care to include that in, I think, their process. But yeah, lots to think about, and also the work you do, Faith. So thank you for the great question. Any other questions online that we want to bring to the front or in the room?
There was one more that was pretty interesting from someone named Daniel Cantor, who says, "Hi, Regina," like 30
Hi,
minutes
Daniel.
ago.
Thanks for coming, Daniel.
Which was, what best practices can digital artists and preservationists adopt to ensure the sustainability and accessibility of digital art while also respecting the artist's intent and creative process?
I think it's like everything we're talking
Yeah,
about.
maybe that's a question.
Like,
It was early.
I do want to mention
FORA.
one thing from FORA. Yeah, exactly. Like that's what FORA is all about. But you know, Christiane was so generous with showing the Whitney's time-based media questionnaire. I do want to raise the fact that there is no technical adopted standard across all institutions and bodies. You know, we're always going to have slightly different metadata schema standards, control vocabulary language. You know, the Met also has their resources for their time-based media questionnaires online. So just recognizing that, it's not just true for conservation either, it's just true about cataloging, how we talk about and deal with artists. And the number one thing, though, is that we should be all championing having a conversation with the artists and not trying to make decisions without them. So.
Yeah, maybe the standard will always be that adaptability. And I loved the way Michael stated that when he talked about the unstructured ways that the rhizome initiatives are describing data in a flexible, fluid way. But hopefully there isn't one size fits all on this, and there probably is no one answer. And if it's generative in the way that our cultural moment also is, it will always be changing. And so we need to create a system that can have that kind of flexibility and fluidity within it. I think we had one more question in the room over here. Yeah.
Hello. My question was, I think you guys kind of covered a little bit of it in answering the last one, but it was kind of just thinking about consensus building, and particularly as we're kind of like opening what's typically like a closed, like museum-based process to like more people who like might not consider themselves conservators but have like opinions about like what's important to preserve about a piece. Like what, I guess, like kind of systems do we think when it comes to like two people or two bodies who might have different goals and might have different philosophies about like how like conservation like should be approached? Like what do we do when we disagree about what belongs in an archive?
Well, Olivia, you're going to help us figure that out because Olivia, who asked this question, is part of the FORA project, the FORA family already. So thank you for that. This is kind of what we're inviting and is part of this more social practice of conservation, which we didn't invent, by the way. I mean, Glenn Wharton, who was the first conservator of time-based media at MoMo, was already talking about social practice when they were doing their PhD in conservation. But I want to see that, like Variable Media Initiative is that example of like somebody else that never met that other person is coming in and like editing and adding their 2 cents. And this is super multifaceted. There should always be some level of conflict. The work is complex, as Kalani mentioned earlier. I mean, I can only hope that because of these works involve emerging technology that we're constantly trying to keep up. I don't want it to ever fully standardize, but maybe that's controversial. Yeah, I don't expect anybody to ever fully agree, but I want to see their opinion next to my opinion so that some PhD researcher can take it all into account and like write their dissertation about it.
Yeah, I think also to a model maybe like Wikipedia, which is an evolving editorial process, or other things we've seen with open communities trying to, record information, share knowledge, right? I think hopefully if we're doing it right, there will be differing opinions. There will be a back and forth. That criticism is an act of care, right? And yeah, thank you, Olivia Michaela Ross, for being a part of our care team, is what we're calling it for the Transfer Data Trust, where people who have specialized skill sets are helping us structure these approaches. I think that, all opinions are very welcome, and how we shape the histories around those back and forths and those dialogues is going to be a really important part of this project. So thank you for bringing that question forward. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time too. I'm sure we're ready for lunch. So thank you all for coming. Let's give one last round of applause to everyone who's made this happen. Thank you, Sarah, for moderating the live stream. Thank you, Regina, for your expertise. Thank you to the fabulous team at ONX who has hosted us and produced this. Thank you to our collaborators at NYU. And again, thank you so much to Gray Area, San Francisco-based organization that is helping to bring FORA into the world. And with that, I think we will sign off for now. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kalani.